other people's opinions of you are none of your business. And I think for a lot of years, even professionally, I got really hung up on what people thought about me, what people thought about my ideas, how I was perceived in a room. And the moment that I sort of like let go of that and became a little bit more like authentic to who I am, like I just embraced it, everything got easier. And I found that like people liked me more because I think they could sense that I was like, this is exactly who I am. You're going to get the same all the time. I'm not trying to be or do anything. This is just it.
What's going on, guys? My name is Ryan Snod. It Rhymes with Odd, and you're listening and watching the Rhymes with Odd podcast. Today we are talking with Abi Reiland in the studio. Abi, welcome in.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, we're going to talk about all fun things, owning gym businesses, doing all different things with real estate, entrepreneurship, female empowerment, the whole gamut. So really excited to chat with you today.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So for the layman that doesn't know who you are, can you tell people who you are and what you do? I feel like you're in an elevator or an Uber and someone's getting chatty.
For sure. So Abi Reiland, I am president of commercial real estate for the Sarah Hopkins real estate team, traditionally a residential brokerage, but creating kind of a sector for commercial. And I also own 8035 Fitness, which includes 3 brick and mortar locations and a corporate wellness program. And then we also operate a really big like CrossFit competition event. That we're, I think we're like 12 years in. And I run a women's kind of empowerment panel that's an annual event as well. So that's kind of the shtick.
Lots of stuff going on. Yeah. My kind of people in here. I love it. I feel like with all the stuff going on, what's the driving force behind? Is it just you get bored and you got to do a new thing, or you just like being busy? What's the driving force for all this stuff?
Both. So I have a severe case of shiny object syndrome.
Same.
I've gotten better as I've aged at like following through. That's been a practice that I've had to definitely work on. But I don't know. I'm like a really curious person by nature. And so I think when I discover something that I really like, I have a hard time not like doing something with it. I also really like to stay busy. So if I'm not busy, I get like really unproductive. So busy is like where I've always said that I thrive in chaos. Like that's my favorite place to be.
Sure. Well, I think it's a testament to being able to roll with the punches in life, because I feel like so many people, they get their good job and it's stable, and then like you just take that and copy paste it all your other life. You get a stable, safe partner. You get a stable, safe house that's maybe not what you need, but well, it fits the right thing, or whatever. Your boring little car, like you just copy and paste it. Where if you have that kind of, I don't know, abundance mindset, I think more good things come your way. So.
Well, and stability, I'm going psychology on you for a second, but
let's do it.
Stability is like one of the human needs, right? And I rank very low on it. Like that's not my priority. I like new things. I like productivity. I'm good with risk. I tend to take a lot of risk. And it doesn't always pay off, but when it does, it's great.
Sure. Well, and I think, and we'll talk about this too, but you co-own some of these businesses with your husband, Luke, who I've also met as well.
Yep.
And then any kids too as well?
Yes. I have 2 kids. I have a 16-year-old son, Gage, and an 11-year-old daughter, Oakley.
Oh, very cool. Yeah. Very fun. I know my wife and we have a 2-year-old son and then a 9-month-old daughter. So similar kind of mine.
Not
I'm just
at
a couple
all similar. 16 and 11 is so easy. So easy. They're like fun. And when you travel, they're just like having extra people with you.
Yeah.
That age, like I love my children, but I would never do it again.
Sure. My wife thrives with young ones and she's not good with teenagers, where I'm the opposite. Like I'm looking forward to like raising a young man and a young woman to be like a good person. Yeah. Not the best baby crying and diapers and stuff. I mean, I've adapted obviously, but
they're really fun when they're older.
Sure.
Like you can have conversations and I love this age.
Sure. Well, and then they get into like sports or activities and you can like see them shine doing their thing. And I think that's always a fun thing too. So.
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome. Well, I think this is great. We can definitely jump in. The types of stuff though is interesting because I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs, they'll pick one industry and stick. Mm-hmm. You're obviously diversified in other things, fitness being a big part of it, but real estate and stuff like that. So before we jump into all that fun stuff, I want to kind of know like, Where did Abi come from? What's your origin story? What's kind of the foundation of where you started in life?
Yeah. So, born in Mason City. My dad is a therapist and my mom is a nurse. And so the funny thing about me is a lot of people, I'm not a feelingsy person. Like I'm not a mushy gushy person.
You'd be a great HR person, would
you? Right? That personality trait has served me really well in the businesses that I'm in. But it's because my dad would always be like, how does that make you feel? And I got to a point where I was like, I don't have any feelings. I don't want to talk about feelings. No. So anyway, my dad was a therapist, mom a nurse, amazing humans. I have a younger sister. Grew up in Mason City. And then when I was a sophomore in high school, we moved. So I ended up finishing out high school at Urbandale. So that was probably the first time in my life that I mean, you know, when you're in high school and you have to move schools, that sucks. Like I remember showing up at Urbandale and I was like, oh my God, I don't know anybody. Like everybody's judgy because you're in high school and that's what you do. So that was a very big learning experience for me. And I think that it served me again very well, which I would not have admitted at the time. I ended up going to Iowa State and I got a psychology degree. My plan—
Man, just to avoid all that therapy stuff, you just put yourself right in the fire.
The best part is like, again, I'm a very curious person. And I wanted to know everything about psychology. Like, I find it fascinating, but I have zero interest in, like, being a mental health provider. I would be the worst. So anyway, I went to Iowa State. I was a diver at Iowa State for a couple years. And then when I graduated, I had this idea in my head that I was for sure going to go to, like, New York or Puerto Rico. And I was going to go to grad school for, like, industrial psychology. And then I fell in love and I ended up marrying the guy that I dated at the end of college, and we stuck around here, got pregnant really quick, got divorced really quick. And so that all kind of led to like me meeting my now husband, Luke, and having another child with him. So a lot of learning experiences, but grateful for all of them.
Sure. It got you where you're at right now. So,
it did. Yeah, for sure.
I love it. So with the diving stuff, was that your thing in high school that you at least had a social group, like your swimmers and divers, or were you kind of the black sheep when you were going into high school?
You know, it was helpful when I moved to be on a team. So I was a gymnast and then I got really tall. I'm 5'7", and I pivoted to like tumbling and trampoline. And then in high school, my dad was like, you should try diving. And so I did, and I was decent at it. And then when I moved high schools, I had to actually spend an entire fall semester living with my friends in Mason City to finish my season. And so my parents left me with my friends before I moved so that I could not lose a whole season. And that's when I got in the most trouble I've probably ever been in. It was great though. I had so much freedom. And then when I got to Urbandale, like I had this great team that I got to be a part of the following year. And that was very helpful in like just establishing new relationships.
Sure. Well, I think a lot of times we get in this comfortable stage, but I think as we'll talk about, putting yourself in an uncomfortable situation will oftentimes make you evolve and become better and
totally
have to get outside of your comfort area. When you were at Iowa State, was there any like thought of not doing diving, or was it something you finished all the way through? Because I know a lot of times a Division I athlete, you get the schedule from your coach and you're like, I just want to like sleep or go without with my friends or something. Like, what was that like for you?
I only made it 2 years.
Okay.
So, I would say again, the awesome part about it was you start college and you have this like built-in group of humans, you know, to build relationships with. I will say, like, full transparency, I was not a girl's girl. Like, I always thought other females were my competition growing up. Like, I don't know. It just, I wasn't like a girl's girl, but I developed some really great friendships within that team. And I think that was the start of me like seeing the light, women supporting women. I got 2 years into it, and diving is like a super mental sport. And I hadn't been doing it since I was like, I was diving with girls who'd done it since they were like 5. And I just got like, I was like sick of it. Like I didn't want to give the mental capacity. It was exhausting to me. We had morning practices all the time. And I had friends in college who liked to party. And I was like, I want to do that. So I got 2 years in and I was like, screw it. I'm quitting diving and I'm going to party my ass off for a little while.
Sure. Only the one socially acceptable time to be a complete degenerate is from 19 to 22. Have fun.
and like I hit it hard, like
right on.
I was like, I don't have practice. Like, what does one do? And so I had these other friends who were not in sports and they were like, this is what we do. Like, come with us. And of course I did like you're a D1 athlete, like working out all the time. And then you're not, and you're drinking and eating pizza like constantly. So I had this phase where like in pictures you can see it where like my face is really puffy. And I'm like, oh, that's when I quit diving.
Sure. Yeah, we had a classmate of mine that went to community college that just drank himself to become a blimp of a person. He came back for, I think, winter break 6 months after. Unrecognizable. I'm like, how unhealthy are you? It's kind of a fun time. So, no, that's interesting though, because I think it does take a toll. Like a couple weeks ago, we had Carter Schultz on, who's in Waukees, the GM for D1 Des Moines. Yeah. Used to play for the Vikings, and he was that regimented his entire life. And it's like, I mean, there's obviously things that pay off if you become a professional athlete or you get to that next level or you're on scholarship or whatever. But I definitely think there's a time and place for it. Like, it just depends on how serious you are about the next level,
Yeah. I also and unfortunately, I think this at the time was fairly common for female athletes, especially at a D1 level. But I had an eating disorder and I was a diver, right? So a lot of the divers were up to here on me and super petite and tiny. And that played into it too. I was like, I'm sick of worrying about my size and being thin. I was in a swimsuit all the time. So there were multiple facets of it, but I think mentally I just could not keep going. Sure. I didn't want to. I couldn't. It was time to move on.
Sure. No, I totally get it. So we're coming up to graduation. What was your first role or job out of college when you first got into it and decided you're not going to Puerto Rico for college anymore?
Yeah, real buzzkill. So I interviewed for a job at Pigott Incorporated, and they're a Herman Miller commercial furniture dealer. And at the time, I just wanted a job, so I was applying for just about anything. And I realized right out of college, that psychology degree, it doesn't get you quite what you want. It's not where you have a marketing degree and you go for a marketing role. It's so vague. And so I ended up being a project manager at Pigott, and luckily I worked with a super incredible group of people. And the woman whose account I was on was probably one of the best teachers in terms of professional growth. I knew what she expected of me. I knew when I fucked it up. I knew when I was doing a great job. And so I got paid total garbage. Again, this was a really long time ago too, but I got paid total garbage, but I really liked that job. And then I gradually, while I was there, I expressed interest in pivoting to sales. That was also when the economy kind of tanked. And so there just wasn't a sales role to fill at that time. There wasn't enough work out there to do it. So that's when I kind of pivoted away from Pigott, but I that was my first job out of college and I loved it.
Sure. Because in what industry was that in again?
So it's commercial interiors.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Because I'm it's not quite in the real estate world where you're at now, but I think that
they play together. Yeah, they play together.
Sure. So as you're in this first professional role, at what point did fitness become a big part of your life post-grad, that you're not doing it for diving, but it's a part of your life now?
So it was actually when I got divorced. I had my son and I tried really hard. I was like, oh, I'm going to be a runner, right? I'm going to run because that seems like it's cheap and I can do it anytime, and I'm going to be a runner. And I fucking hate running. I hate it. All I think about when I run is how much I hate running. So I did like a 5K and I was like, yeah, I'm done here. This is not for me. And then I tried really hard to be a yogi because I thought, right, I was a diver, a gymnast, like that seems like a thing. But same thing, like my brain was still able to work while I was doing yoga. And so I hate yoga too. So then I just quit working out for a while. Then I got divorced. And it's interesting because I had never, up to that point, ever lived by myself, ever. And so suddenly I have these nights where I'm all by myself. Like I don't have my child because he's with his dad. I don't have a partner. I don't have a roommate. And so for a minute I took up smoking because that felt like maybe
better than running.
Yeah, I'm like, I'll go outside and I'll smoke cigarettes. I don't know what the logic was there. But
when you just put it like that.
Like I'm bored. I'll just get a pack of cigarettes and I'll go outside. And finally I had a friend who was like in a networking group with me and he's like, I'm opening this thing called CrossFit. You should come and try it. Like you were an athlete, you'll probably like it. And I was like, well, I probably won't, but I'll try. And he hadn't even officially opened yet. So I walked into this dirty warehouse. There was no flooring down. There were like 3 barbells. And he's like, okay, so this is what CrossFit looks like. And we did this workout. And I remember finishing it and thinking like, oh my God, that felt like meditation. Like my brain stopped and it never stops. And I've never done like a physical thing where I could get it to like turn off. And you had to count reps and you had to like kind of pay attention to your form and you had to think about what the next thing was. And so I had to turn all that off. And then it was like over from there. I was sold. I had the Kool-Aid. I drank the Kool-Aid.
Sure. And then everywhere you went for the rest of your life, you're like, hi, I'm Abby. I do CrossFit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I will say that like over the course, so we've owned a CrossFit for 12 or 13 years. And from the time I started to now, my mindset about CrossFit is very different. So like the early stages are like you drink the Kool-Aid, you get the gear, you like want to snatch PR, all that good stuff. And it's shifted a lot as I've aged. So
Sure. Well, and I think it's interesting for myself when I got into it years ago because I just did like commercial gym for 10 years by myself.
Yeah.
And then I kind of got bored because I'm like, there's no social aspect. Everyone here has headphones and doesn't speak to each other.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, so I did CrossFit for a year and a half, 2 years. And now I'm back on the by myself again just for necessity. But I think the community piece is a huge aspect of it for just accountability, but then also the programming too. You just show up, do the workout, and not have to think about anything,
Yeah, it is. And like, I think the one thing about CrossFit that I fight a little bit with people is it gets kind of a bad reputation for a couple of reasons. Number one, people be like, oh, it's a cult. And I'm like, it is, but it's a cult where you're going to have a blast and stay healthier. Like, how bad is that? So
most cults like kill people
right,
or commit suicide together. Like this is a healthy place to be.
So like sign me up for the cult. And the other interesting thing is it's a cult of like highly motivated people. So when it comes to networking or being, they always say surround yourself with the people that you want to be like. And I found that in a room full of CrossFitters, those were the people I wanted to be like. Everyone was motivated. Everyone was there to like accomplish something. The empowerment factor is huge with CrossFit. And so that was one element. The other one was like, people would always be like, ow, you're going to blow out a knee, right? Like your shoulder's going to go to shit. And with that, I'm like, yeah, if your ego is doing the workouts, sure. That's with anything, right? Like you can do anything. And if your ego is operating at the forefront, like there's a chance you're getting hurt. If you told me to sprint 100 meters right now, I'd be super competitive about it and 100% pull a hamstring. Like it's happening. But if you can back down your ego and learn how to like be there for the right reasons, then it's a whole different experience. And so I always tell people like some people can remove the ego. Some people have a really hard time, but CrossFit itself doesn't like hurt you. It's how you do it that can impact that.
Sure. Well, if you look at every other modality of exercise, there's always stigma and everything
always.
There. Like we've shot for Power Life Yoga many years, and the amount of people that fit what you think someone that does yoga, their ethos, their political beliefs, what they do for fun, their family life. But then there's also the outliers that like it's an overweight dude that like to your point, he tried running, couldn't do it. This is like simple, calming. This is something that fits for what he wants, but he doesn't look like a yogi, but he is. Right. Same thing with CrossFit. It's like there's your diehards that look like they could be a games athlete, but then there's also like
That's my husband.
There you go.
My husband is the diehard 8-pack, goes hard every time, you know, whatever. And I'm kind of like, I want to look good naked and I want to sweat and I want to chit chat. Sure. And I love that.
Sure. Everyone can get what they need here.
Right? It's true.
Sure.
It's true.
That's great. So you got your first introduction after the divorce and everything. Mm-hmm. How long before you were like, okay, this is so much fun. I want to like be in the business of CrossFit?
So I met my husband at that CrossFit, and which sounds, you know, super douchey, but it's true. And we got in conversation with a couple other members who were also a couple and just started kind of expressing the desire to start something of our own. We thought we could do a really good job, and we knew that nothing existed downtown. And so over the course of 6 months or so, we figured out kind of the financing, which honestly, starting a CrossFit is not as expensive as people might guess.
And what goes into that, just out of curiosity?
So really, it's just equipment. CrossFit is not a franchise, it's an affiliation. And so you pay like a pretty minimal fee to use the name that you want to use. So to use that word CrossFit, you have to have like a certification in order to put your name on an affiliate. But the certification's like $1,000. You get it done in a weekend. It's really good education, but it's not like anyone can do it. And then in terms of the equipment, I was lucky enough that, you know, my husband works for a company that provides fitness equipment. So we were able to kind of work with them to get really good pricing from his manufacturers. And so like starting a CrossFit like from scratch is primarily equipment with like maybe a computer, an iPad, and a sound system, some flooring. And you're looking at like, depending on the size, anywhere from $20,000 to like $40,000 to like start the whole thing. And that includes your affiliate fee. So,
Sure. Well, and I would consider it, it's grungy boutique, but it's boutique fitness. So you can charge a premium compared to like, you know, a box gym that's, if it's over $50, people are like, oh my God, my pocketbook, where people that are used to paying $100, $150, $200 sometimes for a membership, you can have smaller amount of members, but still get your money back that way too.
And because our goal is like that community factor ties into it so tightly, like we're not selling memberships and hoping people don't show up. Which I think like
that's what Planet Fitness does.
Right, exactly.
We need 30,000 people to pay us $10 a month and never come.
Yeah,
you know?
We want 150, 200 members who show up all the time. Like that's the gold in it. So that's partly where the premium comes from. In addition to that, it's one of those things where like the coaching aspect is super important in CrossFit because you can get injuries if someone's not telling you how to deadlift well. And so making sure that you're compensating coaches who are qualified and good at what they do is really, really important. The one downfall is because you're not a franchise, you're only an affiliate, you can really operate any way you want. There are no rules. And so regardless of having that one human who needs their level 1 certification, you could hire anyone off the street. So occasionally we'll have people who will say to me like, oh yeah, I tried CrossFit, but I got hurt the first day and no one coached me, and so I don't want to do it. And I'm like, well, they're all super different. They're all individually owned. And so don't discount CrossFit as a holistic thing just because the one location kind of wasn't your jam. They all have a really different vibe.
Sure. No, I think that's great. So you guys launched this business. Did you said there's 4 parties involved. So it was you, Luke, and then another couple?
Yeah. Okay. Still one of my best friends. But another couple, we started the business as 50-50, like kind of partnership between the couples. I would advise never, ever to do that to anybody. I didn't know, like we didn't know better.
They always say the one ships that are known to sink are partnerships.
Yes. So we ended up buying them out because we just had sort of a difference in perspective on the business and the direction we wanted to take it. I mentioned before, I'm a risk taker. Luke and I saw opportunity for growth and we wanted to push it that way. They were more drawn to stability and they wanted to kind of like keep it a certain size and retain that. And so we just got to a point where it made more sense for us to buy them out. So that would have been maybe like roughly 10 years ago, maybe a little bit less. that we bought them out to maintain full ownership.
Sure. Were you and Luke married at the time when you guys did that deal, or were you guys not married yet?
When we took over entirely, we were married. When we first opened, we were actually not married. We were pregnant.
Right on.
Because I got knocked up. That's a whole nother story.
I'm sure it's graphic. We can believe that part. No, we'll leave the details of that out.
Yeah, no, it's it was like a so surprise, I'm pregnant, and then we decided to get married. But when we first started it, I still remember to this day, our two partners, the men that me and my friend were dating at the time, they were like, oh yeah, we'll do it 50-50. Like, we're obviously committed to you guys. And I was like, nah, that's not how this is going to go. Like, Audra and I want ownership. And so really it was more of like a 4-way split, but as couples, we had 50-50. And then when Luke and I bought them out, when we went to the bank to get the loan, they had kind of indicated that, we could both be on it. One of us could be on it. Financially, 2 was better than 1. And I told my husband at the time, I want majority ownership so that in the event that we cannot make a decision, I get the say.
Sure.
So you can imagine there was a little back and forth there. Like, well, obviously we're spouses, we're partners. Like, it'll be fine if we're 50-50. And I was like, no, I want 51%.
Sure. Yeah, it's always interesting though, because we'll talk about like buyouts, and there's a million ways you could do it too. It's like you can get a loan, you can do a percentage of profit, revenue share, that type of thing. Did you have to do like a lump sum and then they were out, or was it like a percentage? Okay,
we did lump sum. So we got like a buyout loan from a bank. We got them a check for a lump sum, and I'm pretty sure we'll finish paying that off like this July.
Oh, nice.
So yeah,
sure.
It's we kind of did the math, which at the time wasn't really our thing. Should have done better math. But lump sum was just easier to separate.
Sure. No, that's cool. I know we've had other people on the show, like just other people in different industries that have had percentage buyouts of like, oh, you'll get X amount of profit over the course of this time to cover it. There's so many different ways you can slice that pie. So it's always interesting to hear how people do it.
We liked the clean cut approach. I felt like there was less room for conflict.
Sure. And then it's done. You can move on, and then it's done. That's great.
Exactly.
So so you guys open the first location downtown.
Yep.
Were you guys was it the type of box where both you and Luke are in there coaching every single class in the beginning? Did you guys systematize the crap out of it? Like, what was that like in the first year or two?
Yeah. So when we first opened, we were in the East Village. We had a tiny little spot, and it was us 4 owners that were running every class. We all had full-time jobs. I was pregnant. We were building a house. It was a lot.
It sounds like your cup of tea. A lot going on.
Yeah, it was a lot. But pregnant, waking up at like 4:15 a.m. to go coach was like not my favorite. I did a lot of guilt tripping to get Luke to take my classes. But we very quickly realized we needed some help. And so we brought on this super amazing guy, JD Alex, to take on a bunch of the classes. He was like the coolest guy to have in charge of your community. Just like super tatted up. He wore like tight leggings. Like he was kind of an outlier, like a black sheep looking dude, but people loved him. And then after that, we gradually kept bringing in like kind of part-timers, like people who had full-time jobs who would coach, 2 morning classes a week or whatever. We expanded within the first like 90 days, maybe a little bit more than that. And then within a couple years, maybe even a year and a half, our landlord got real mad about our noise, and we needed more space anyway. And he was like, I'll let you out of your lease if you just go find somewhere else to go. And so we ended up moving to our current location, which was much larger. And we've now kind of been there ever since. But over the course of those years, we transitioned from having like Luke and I heavily involved in the coaching side to today, like we don't coach classes unless we need to, if there's coverage needs. And we also pivoted from the mindset of like, let's try not to pay for overhead or for like staff. Let's try and get like, different people to cover morning classes who have full-time jobs, and we'll just comp them a membership. We shifted away from that and shifted to like full-time staff. So that was I think a really important move for us to make to maintain the quality of what we were doing.
Sure. Did you guys see any kind of bump in membership or retention or new members wanting to come, having those kind of consistent coaches and the quality there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it made our lives easier too, because it's, when you have someone who has a full-time job and they've got a life and they're just doing this little part-time thing for their membership, stuff comes up and you can't. They were all 1099s, like they were independent contractors, and it was just kind of like an exchange. I almost never had to even pay them. If they did extra classes, we would. And so you couldn't tell them like, hey, you can't take that day off. You just had to figure it out. And, when you have 10 people covering little bits of part-time stuff and they all have lives outside of that job, it just gets messy. It gets hard.
And then 20 people show up and there's no coach.
Right.
And you're like, I guess we'll just like swing around on the pull-up bars like it's playground time or something, or leave,
We hardly ever had that happen. but yeah, it just became like difficult to manage that. So.
Sure. So you guys expand, you're in your current spot now.
Mm-hmm.
At what point did you decide, okay, aggressive growth's the way, we want to open up a second location? And this one's in Grimes, right? Was your second?
Technically, no. So we never really, we thought about growing, but we didn't ever really consider multiple locations until we were approached by a group from Pleasant Hill to buy their existing gym. And so we did end up buying it. We ran that gym for a few years. And after we had the 2 locations, that's when we started eyeing Grimes. Pleasant Hill is a community that's like very tightly knit, I learned. And I felt after a number of years that they needed an owner who was like local. And so we ended up selling that and opening Grimes almost simultaneously. And so that's where kind of like the growth mindset, came from. The Waukee one is more recent, and that's a bit of a different model for us. And so we're still like kind of figuring that out.
Sure. That's cool. So as you have these 2 locations, before you guys added Platinum, what were some of the things that were easy with that second one? And then what were some of the things that made you guys want to like gouge your eyes out?
So I think, when it comes to multiple locations, it's easy to have this idea in your head that you're just replicating something. We had a system, we had staff in place, we had programming. So, okay, we're just going to take all this and we're going to like duplicate it and we're going to apply it over here and it's going to be great. That's not how it works. And I say that for multiple reasons. Number one, you have to consider the demographics that you're serving. And so like downtown, heavy commuter demographic, a lot of young people. That was our first location. And at the time we were highly competitive in CrossFit. We had teams going to regionals and aiming for like games qualification. And so people viewed that location a certain way. And when we opened up in Grimes, our demographic was 10 years older. Their approach to CrossFit was a lot different. It wasn't for the competitive aspect. It was for the like staying in shape aspect. And it was a smaller community. So just the way they operate in general, like a class with 35 people versus a class with 8 people, it's different. And so we had to make some adjustments in like the way that we coach classes, the way that we interact with members. A lot of times we'd have this idea that like, oh, we'll have like a community-wide event where both our locations are invited and we'll do it downtown because it's bigger. We learned very quickly that for people who don't work downtown and live in Grimes, they don't want to go downtown. That's a really long drive for them. We were doing it every day, so it didn't feel like a big deal, but we'd have these like events. None of our suburb people would be there, so we really learned to like treat them as very unique individual locations and not as like just this big thing.
Sure. I think that makes sense. Well, and I found that too. I work from Southeast Iowa, and I used to have to drive 30 minutes to get anywhere.
Yeah.
And now you ask somebody to drive 30 minutes across the metro, and like, I don't think I can do it. Like, I had somebody was going to do a podcast, and they're in like Norwalk. It's
Yeah.
30-minute drive.
That's not that
And like,
far.
I just never get out to Granger ever. I'm like, it's 30 minutes. Like it's not, I'm not asking
And if you drive fast, it's like 25.
There you go. That's the thought. Yeah. I'm like, I'm not asking you to rent a helicopter and come out here.
Yeah.
It's like, it's just on the highway. So some people that's a long drive. So I get that.
Yeah.
So you're doing the 2 locations. When you said 12 years ago, you guys did your first circus.
Mm-hmm.
What was the idea to do your own event and kind of get into the live event space?
So at the time, we knew about CrossFit Games, which is like the world championships of CrossFit. It was an individual only thing. And I remember JD, Alex, the guy that we had brought on board, mentioning like these competitive opportunities. And he had kind of formulated like this team from our gym that wanted to like start competing. And at the time, there were no, like, you couldn't find a competition locally. That was a weird thing. And so in my head, I like the chaos of events. Like, I like the pressure, and I like that it's like a pressure cooker of time, you know? And so I thought, well, I can do this, like, obviously.
I got it.
Yeah, like, I can do this. So I remember being like, okay, we're going to start this event. We'll call it, our first event was actually called the Mat Games, which stood for Ménage à Trois. And the reason it was stood for Ménage à Trois was because in CrossFit, there are all these workouts named after veterans and named after women. And so, like, all of the some of the like standard where you test your time to determine if you're getting better are like Helen or Karen or Fran. And so the approach to the event initially was, we'll do 2 women and 1 guy. Ménage à Trois. And so
I got it.
Yeah. So that's where the name originally came from. It then pivoted. I think the first year we did, it was individuals. And then in my head as a business person, I'm doing math, and I'm like, okay, if I'm charging like $100 registration for 1 person per lane, add another person and I've doubled my revenue. And so the first event we have, I remember looking at registrations one day and I was like, uh-oh, we can't have this at our gym. I didn't cap the registration. I forgot. And so it got to be too big, and then I had to rent out Wells Fargo.
Oh, wow. And that's not cheap either.
No.
That's very expensive.
Yeah, like was it Hy-Vee Hall at the time, or was it whatever it was?
It's the Casey Center now.
Yeah, like I don't even know what it was, but we rented out a venue. We had to figure out how to get a rig. We had to figure out flooring. And if I'm being totally honest, the first few years were just a giant shit show. Like, we barely made it through, but people's standards were so low, it didn't matter.
Sure.
Because there was nothing else to do. So gradually we failed at a bunch of stuff, or we fucked up a bunch of stuff, or got feedback from people that they hated certain stuff. And we always took it very much to heart. And as we approached the next year, we'd make adjustments and changes. And now we've got kind of like a finely tuned system. But I will say the circus is the closest Luke and I have ever been to divorce.
Okay.
So
it probably caused a lot of tension just to get everything put together and pick out your roles in the live event production and then stick to the roles. Or
that's not even the hard part. The part that we would get in like knockdown blowout fights about was the programming.
Oh,
what the workouts were going to be. And initially, it was because his role was a lot more logistics focused. So like getting the equipment on site, making sure it was set up, making sure for every event we knew how the floor had to be. My role was a lot more like on the kind of like, I set up the website, I did the ticketing, I organized the times, I got the heat set. I had to line up the judges and get the volunteers going. And so in my mind, a lot of what we were doing was based on like, how many judges can I have on the floor? How much time do I have? Because you have to math out like, how many teams do I have and how long is each event? We can't go for 24 hours straight, you know? And so he'd have an idea for an event and I'd be like, no, we can't do that. And he'd be like, why not? Like, you won't even listen to my idea. And I'd be like, it's not possible. Like, it's not feasible. That's dumb. And then I'd be like, oh, what about this? And he'd be like, that's not even hard. People aren't even going to sweat enough. And I'd be like, okay. So now we're much better at it. But there were a few years where we'd like fight about programming.
Sure. No, that's really fun. I think, and that's an interesting transition too, to talk about like co-owning a business with your spouse. We've talked with plenty of people on the show that do this. What's been the biggest reward for you guys as a married couple? And then also like the biggest stressor or things that have like you said, kind of put you in a pressure cooker and you have to kind of come out the other side?
You know, I think that the best thing everything has come out of it, right? I think that Luke and I have one of the best relationships that I know of, because we have to be partners in everything. And so we've gotten better at communication. We've gotten better at being patient with one another. We've gotten better at knowing when and how to compromise with each other. And I think we can, like the two of us, and I'm not just saying this to be like, you know, oh, rah, rah, everything's rainbow and sunshines, but like, I think Luke and I can do anything. Like, if I tell him I want to do X, Y, and Z and he's down, like, we can do it. I can't do it by myself. He can't do it by himself, but we know that like together we're solid. And we're pretty good at having each other's backs. So we're very supportive of one another. We have like a massive mutual respect for one another. I think the instances where it's been really difficult is we used to get in a lot of fights because Luke is very much, and I mentioned this before, but like he looks the part, right? He looks like a CrossFitter. He's got this like, you know, kind of intense frowny face all the time and like whatever. And so there was this perception in our community with our business and with our event, because he's the one on the microphone at the event. I don't want to do that. I like all the back end stuff. I'm really good at that. But there became this perception that he was doing everything. And so like we'd be standing next to each other and someone would walk up to him, not addressing me at all, and be like, Luke, great job with the event. I love how you run your businesses. Listen, motherfucker.
And then you like peek behind his massive shoulders like, the fuck?
Yeah. So there were instances where, you know, it wasn't that I was upset that he was getting any like credit for it, right? Because he is a big part of it. But I was spending a lot of time day to day on all of these things. And I felt like in those instances, it would have been easy for him to be like, actually, Abby did that. Or yeah, me and Abby like have a great time putting it together. But he would like smile and shake their hand and thank them, you know, being polite. And I wouldn't even get mentioned. And that started to really piss me off, like really piss me off. And I vocalized it probably not in the best manner several times. And so it would turn into like a fight. And I'm like, I'm not fighting for like full credit. That's not what I'm looking for. But it sucks that I can sit there and like watch someone take full credit for and I'm getting like no one even recognizes that I'm like a pivotal part of this. And so that was, I think, especially as a female, very frustrating. I also remember, he's going to be pissed when I tell this story, but so I remember we were signing a lease one time and I had done all the upfront negotiations. I had found the space, identified like how big it was, you know, looked at rates, everything. And we visited with the landlord on site. It was the first time I think Luke had been in the space, maybe second time. And we walked in and the landlord immediately started talking to him when I had been the one in contact, you know, constantly. And I was irritated right away, but I'm like, whatever. So they're chatting about some of the details and the landlord asks something about paint color. And all of a sudden they both turn around and look at me and they go, oh, what do you want for paint color? And I was like, up to this point, you guys have been speaking to each other about this entire lease like I'm not in the room. Like I haven't been the only component of it. And now that you're talking about like the girly element of fucking paint color, you turn to me like I'm here. And so I remember being like, I think I said, I don't fucking care. And I left because I was like, I'm going to freak out. And like the landlord's in the room and I don't want to be that person. And Luke walked outside and he's like, what's your deal? And I was like, if you ever do that to me again, specifically in front of somebody, like we're going to therapy. And then I think he knew it was like very serious.
Sure.
I just think as women, like we have to fight for more than I think men do, particularly in situations where it tends to be male dominant. They're not going to default to me ever. And so I expect my partner to force that default or force me to be part of the conversation when the other side of it, doesn't do that. So anyway, that's we definitely had some like fights about that in particular. Like
Sure.
You get to be the face of it and that's fine, but you better make sure I'm part of the fucking conversation when you're getting all the pats on the back.
Sure. Well, I think the recognition point is a huge part. I mean, obviously for you as a person, but
yeah, anyone
anyone that's that kind of behind the scenes, the right hand, the operator of anything, you'd think a CEO gets all the credit for everything, but then there's people that it's like the guy behind the curtain in Wizard of Oz, like somebody's run this shit behind the scenes.
Right.
And they like to get noticed and recognized every once in a while. So I think, would you say like the words of affirmation is your big thing, or just at least being recognized with that?
I think recognition is big for me. And it's not as if I need like pats on the back for the day to day. But again, like when it's my partner and I doing something together and recognition comes his way, I expect him to include me in that. And I do the same. I'd say that, but occasionally I'll be like, I run that fucking gym, so on both sides, we need to be better at like that. But I think we've gotten to a place where like, because there is that mutual respect and we've had those conversations, he knows that's important to me now. I know what's important to him. And so we're better.
Well, it's so interesting to me because we talked about ego. If you're ego lifting, you're going to get hurt.
Yeah.
But also if you let your ego get too big in business, you're going to get hurt too.
Right.
But you also kind of need a little bit of swagger to, like you said, that risk taker in you to be like, we got like you said, as long as Luke and I are on the same, like we can do freaking anything.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's kind of a fine line to dance of like, you got to puff your chest up and walk tall, but you also don't want to like be arrogant and then overlook the details or the minute things that are just going to get you in hot water. So
yeah. Well, and shit can crumble like in a second, like COVID was a big eye-opening experience. Like you're rocking and rolling, you're crushing it. Ego could probably, inflate a little and then like boom, overnight, everything changes. And so, I never am of the mindset that like I'm on top of the world and I'm dominating and this is going to last forever. Like my assumption is always that I'm going to lose everything tomorrow. So that's why I think part of me likes that shiny object syndrome, because I like the idea of being able to diversify when you need to. Like adapting is, I think, like the most crucial thing in business. If you can't adapt, like at some point you're going to die. And so whether it's with the gyms, real estate, like whatever, I try to constantly adapt.
This episode is sponsored by Executive Laser Wash, a 24/7 touchless car wash with 6 locations in the Des Moines metro area. This is a second-generation business, and we've actually had Spencer on the podcast as a guest, and they were gracious enough to sponsor today's show. We currently shoot with their team each month, and I continue to learn new things about the industry and see firsthand how Executive Laser Wash keeps holding it down and not cutting corners for their customers. If you're needing a car wash, this is the place to do it. Their state-of-the-art washes allow you to get in and out quickly, pay from your phone without rolling down the window, and they are consistently reinvesting in better improvements to keep your car looking its best. I personally like using time in the car wash to get caught up on emails while the car gets cleaned. That's a pro tip right there, so you should do the same. They've also recently added monthly memberships where you can get unlimited washes for a flat monthly price. So if you're one of those people that's really particular about keeping your ride clean year-round, this is a great option for you. Supporting the sponsors that support this show allows the podcast to continue to be free for you to enjoy each and every week. If you're interested in giving them a try, you can use code ODDPODCAST, that's ODDPODCAST, for 50% off your first 2 months of any wash membership. No contracts, cancel anytime. Just download the Executive Laser Wash app and follow the prompts for adding a membership. Just make sure to include Odd Podcast at checkout in the discount section for that 50% off your first 2 months. Now, let's get back to the conversation. some of the things we want to make sure we've covered this. I think this is a good time to do your lightning round. So
okay, let's go.
This
is going to be bad. You said it's about CrossFit, right?
It is.
Oh God.
So
it's been a while since I was like a Kool-Aid drinker. Now I'm more of like a business operator, but go for it.
Now you just you're just sipping it slightly. It's like a fine thing.
Yeah. It's like a port wine or something. I don't know. Like a whiskey, whatever.
Well, sniff it, swirl it. We're going to do it. This will be fun. So, we'll start with kind of a fun one. I have a number in mind that I want you to hit with this one, but we're going to have you name as many workout titles as possible with the names you mentioned earlier. Like Murph is one, Cindy's another one. They just kind of give you the, you don't have to be like row, back row. Like it's not exercise, the name of the workout. So before we start, how many do you think you can rattle off?
Oh gosh, I bet I can give you like 10. Even though they're like a bajillion. Sure. But I can probably give you 10.
I'll say 20. I'm going to push you to 20.
I can do 20? Okay.
You rattled off 5 earlier without even thinking.
I can do a combination of like the veteran ones and the women.
Yes.
Okay.
Anything that's got is like a known word. It's not just like, we call this one Greg because the dude at the garage location's name's Greg. He likes this one. It's like, no, like it has to be a known one. Okay. Yeah. So pretend my clicker's on here. Okay. We'll start. Here we go.
Okay, here we go. So Chad and Murph are the men's ones that I think are the most known. Fran is the most famous female. Diane, Karen, Cindy. Oh God, I don't like Cindy.
That one sucks.
Oh my gosh, now I'm gonna brain fart. Grace.
You said another one earlier that started with an H for the woman.
Helen.
There you go.
I should be way better than this. I could give you a bunch of just like names and cross my fingers. But
people that aren't CrossFitters, like just Amanda, Carrie.
Elizabeth.
Okay. You got 10 now. You hit your threshold. Okay. This is the victory lap.
I'm trying to think here. Okay, we already did Karen. Grace. I don't know. That's good. That's my goal.
Those are the names, but are there other ones that you know that are not name ones that stick out?
Most of like our standards that so like every month we have a named workout that we do because it's a measurement tool and it's like a known measurement tool. And so, we try not to repeat, like we'll do one of those a month, but we won't repeat the same workout in like a calendar year. And so like Luke, my husband, knows names like they're going out of style. He'll memorize an entire room of people, first and last names, birth dates, everything. So he would be able to rattle off probably like 40. Sure. I'm not kidding. And sometimes he'll even say one, and I'm like, "What's that one again?"
Yep. My favorite was we do in the CrossFit days. I do a workout named after a girl, and we get done with it. I'm like, God, Cindy's a bitch. We'd always say that. I'm like, that fucking Helen, like she's a whore. Yeah.
Well, the story behind it is Greg Glassman, who founded CrossFit, started creating these like female named workouts, and he's quoted in saying something along the lines of, nothing else will put you flat in your back as out of breath as these workouts than a woman. And so I had to name them after women because nothing else can do that to you. And so that's the story. Sure. Sexist or not, that's the story. Sure.
No, I love it. Yeah. I love it. Okay, so that was good. We hit like 10-ish. I was thinking you could just pull it out 20 here.
No.
Your least favorite CrossFit movement? What's the thing that you see it on a workout? You're like, I'm just going to leave.
Thrusters.
Okay.
I hate thrusters.
Is it because it just gets you really out of breath? For those that aren't CrossFit people, you squat and front squat with a bar and then you press it over your head.
So it's usually with a light to moderate barbell weight, and you're doing like a front squat and then you're going into like a push press overhead. Mm-hmm. And so it elevates your heart rate. It like peaks your heart rate very quickly, especially depending on like what else you're doing in the workout. I don't like anything that's like a front squat of any variation. So I especially don't like those. Mm-hmm. Just not a fan of the thruster.
Sure.
But they're good for you.
Yeah. I don't mind them because I'm quad dominant. So I like that works for me really well. Anything inverted for me is like, nope, I'm not meant to be upside down ever. Like,
see, and that was normally like my go-to. Anything gymnastics, like toes to bar, handstand push-ups, like loved all that stuff. Sure. Squat snatches, like bring it.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Most improved movement. Like when you first started doing CrossFit, you sucked at it. Now you're really good at it.
Cleans. Yeah. We, I I recall in college learning a clean and being worried that if I went too heavy that I was going to like get giant legs or something, which is not a thing, by the way.
Walking around looking like Lou Ferrigno.
Yeah, like that's not really a thing. But now I have a pretty strong, like I'm a good hang clean or hang power clean. I have fast hips, so
sure.
I love that.
That's great. It's all technique too, which is something you can really work on too. It's not just like, I do really good bicep curls because my arms are humongous. Like you can get better at it that way. That's
I've also taught my kids cleans, and my son is now in high school. And when he first started going to like high school weight room lifting, the coaches were all like, holy shit, you have a beautiful clean. And I was like, tell him it's your mom.
Sure. He's over there with the mop. Like, thanks, I'll be here all weekend. This is perfect.
Yep.
Most CrossFit game wins from a person that is a man and the woman. So the person that has won the most championships in the CrossFit games for the men.
Yeah, T. Claire Toomey is the female.
Female, yep.
And Matt Frazier is the male.
I want to say Rich had it 4, and then Matt has 5 now, right?
Matt got Rich, and then he retired.
Oh.
So he beat his record. Rich Froning still competes like at a super high level. He's just on a team. So if you take Rich Froning's individual wins combined with his team wins, he's smoking everybody, I think. But individually, like Froning was dominant, and then Frazier came in after Froning retired, and he's dominated since. But he's retired now.
Sure. I'm a huge sucker for a good sports documentary, and watching the Rich Froning one, I don't know if I've ever seen like literally the fittest person on earth. Watching the workouts and the demand he puts on his body, like his full-time job is to just work out till he passes out 12 hours a day. I'm like, I don't understand. Like LeBron James, he sleeps.
Yeah.
Tiger Woods, he sleeps or rests. Like the dude is a machine. I don't understand.
Yeah.
Like it's crazy that someone else could even beat someone like that. So
he was really smart though. I mean, he'd take his winnings and kind of like invest in business sectors that worked well with his popularity. And so like he had cattle, and he has a gym and programming and like all these things that tie to CrossFit. So when you're a big name and then you create these entities, people like flock. And so he's smart.
Sure. No, I love it. And same thing in the bodybuilding world. It's like there's some of the best athletes out there that fit that, but they don't understand how to monetize their name or their image or anything.
Yeah.
And now it's like you can just hire someone that knows how to do it. Like you look at like Chris Bumstead or some of these other people that they're multi-millionaires because they understand it now. And just seeing Tia doing like, heavy squats with a baby 9 months pregnant and the baby's like flexing in her womb. I'm like, Jesus, like these people are just freaks,
She's a freak. I'm careful with that. I think the one thing, I shouldn't say the one because I've now listed like 2 or 3, but in CrossFit, I think sometimes there's this like, oh, I'm a badass mentality. Like who can be the biggest badass? Who can tear their hands the most? Like who can, lift the most weight when they're pregnant? And sometimes I'm like, really? Like I don't think that the general public needs to have this standard set. Like she's a professional athlete. She's working with like doctors and coaches who are like helping her through this. I don't think deadlifting PRs when you're pregnant is worth it. Just a personal opinion. Like, can you deadlift heavy? Yeah, like for sure. Should you keep working out? Yes, 100%, as long as you're feeling good. But I do think there was a period of time where like it got really popular to have these like super 9-month pregnant women like getting PRs on a crazy lift. And I was like, oh my God, like what are we doing? That's not, no.
Well, and you have to realize too that everyone has an opinion when they see that video.
Yeah.
Everyone's commenting, sharing that, and that's why it got so popular because everyone's got an opinion.
Right.
Very opinionated opinion of like, what the hell are you doing? And then other people are like, hell yeah, like whatever. Yeah. Everybody's got opinions. So
yep.
Okay, so in the same vein of that, 2024 games happened.
Mm-hmm.
What was the first place payout for the men and the women, which is equal pay, by the way?
I know.
We talk about female equality in pay. This is great.
I love it.
How much money did they get for the first prize?
I'm going to guess $250,000.
More.
It wasn't more?
Yeah.
It used to be 250,000. What is it now?
315.
Okay. That's a decent, inflation, right?
Sure.
Like, yeah, I got to be honest, I didn't even watch most of 2024. And there was a guy who died.
Oh my God.
And that like killed it for me.
Sure.
That was a bad play of
But
words. Yeah, like that.
God.
Too soon.
Sure. Did he just like heat exhaustion? I was aware.
No, he drowned.
Oh my God.
Yeah. It was like a big like thing. But yeah, it was day one and they had to do like I think it was like a bike run swim situation. And he's a strong swimmer. He was like I think he was a water polo player. Very fit guy. And they said that the water temperature was very warm, and I don't know if that played into it. His death has been ruled like an accident, so it didn't appear that he had like any heart issues when this happened, but he was about, I think, 100 yards from the beach finishing, and you could see it on the live feed. He started to struggle, and he was going under, and there were like 2 paddle boards quite near him with lifeguards on them who just didn't see it. And then he went under, and someone like on the beach or the dock was like yelling, trying to get someone to do something. It was too late, and he had a bracelet or like a, like a anklet thing on to go past the finish line, and he never passed the finish line. So they had to go do a search and rescue.
Holy cow.
Yeah. That's
terrible.
Well, and then it was like, do we keep going? Like, do we keep having the event? They canceled the remainder of that day. And then they did resume the next day. I think some of the, like, based on what I've read, I think some of the choices made in the way things were communicated and the way things were dealt with are a little bit questionable in terms of, like, CrossFit taking accountability.
Well, they want a distance from they don't want to get sued, so they're going to.
Right. And they I think, and again, like I've just read stuff, but I think they publicly stated to the athletes that like his family wanted them to continue on with the event. And I don't believe that conversation was necessarily had, is what it sounded like. So I don't know. Everything's kind of hearsay, like
Sure.
It's super tragic. It was super sad. I think it was preventable, but it's hard to identify like one responsible party in a situation like that. And clearly, like, I don't know if he cramped, I don't know.
Yeah.
Strong swimmer, almost done, but he'd done a bunch of shit before that and
Sure.
like just couldn't finish.
That's crazy. I know I've heard other situations like that. One of them, again, sports documentary guy, the WWE guy that fell. He was supposed to be this is years ago, in the rafters, and his thing broke and he fell, died. They shut the lights off, took his body out, turned the lights on, and just kept the show going.
On. Yeah.
I'm like, and then my wife and I were at the gym. We were at, it's the Genesis on Merle Hay, but it was Aspen at the time.
Yeah.
This was 4 or 5 years ago. We were finishing up our workout, coming back, and some guy was doing back row, warming up, like probably 275, big guy.
Yeah.
And he'd just gotten there, passed out with like a 45 plate on each side, just rowing, and he just passed out. We all started working on him, chest compressions. We called the ambulance, whatever. 20 minutes, he's dead. And people just went back to their workout after like doing mouth breathing and compressions and trying to break the guy's ribs. And I'm like, how could you just like, oh, I got to finish my workout. I'm like, what? I'm going home. I'm going to like pray about this. This is crazy. I'm like, you're just going to be like compartmentalized professional. I'm like, this person's like probably done some crazy stuff in their life because they just
we actually, so we had a member, this was, I think, our second or third year of like the mat games / the circus. And it was the last day. We were almost done with the day. I think we had like a handful of heats left on the last event. And a member of ours who had competed early 40s, early or mid 40s, he happened to be speaking to a chiropractor and an ER nurse. They were like having a conversation. And all of a sudden, he turned gray and like tipped backwards. And they immediately started chest compressions, started yelling at me to go get the AED. We were in Hy-Vee Hall, and I didn't know where it was. I ran down the hallway trying to find it. It was in a locked plastic box, so I had to break it off the wall. I got it in there. The battery was low. They had to shock him 7 times, I believe, before the ambulance even got there. So he'd wake up and like sit up, like take a deep breath and like go kind of crazy. And then he'd like just tip back over. And luckily like chest compressions and CPR were started within seconds of him hitting the floor because he was talking to the right people. The whole event stops, obviously. No one knows what's going on. I'm freaking out. We called 911. They got there. The ambulance was like, you need to contact someone in his family. Because he was a member, I had like an emergency contact. So I had to call his wife and be like, your husband just had a cardiac event. I'm going to the hospital with him. She was like 20 minutes away or something. So we're in the middle of this event and I'm like, I have to go with him, like figure it out. And he survived, but he had a widowmaker heart attack. And they said that if it had happened like in the hallway or in the parking lot, he had like 2 minutes. 2 minutes to like get CPR and like AED. And if no one had been there or if it had happened, at the time our gym did not have an AED. So this is like a member of our gym who, if it had been 1 day later and he was at a class and tipped over, he'd probably be dead. Mm-hmm. And so right after that, we like did a fundraiser. We got an AED. We donated one to another gym, but like that shit is crazy.
Sure.
Like it was terrifying. And I do not know how people can like just carry on.
Right. Even if you're not an empath, like if you're the one doing that, like your hands are on someone, like how do you just be like, okay, and scene, I'm going to go like, what the hell? Like,
I was like shaking for like 2 days afterwards.
Yeah.
Like it was scary, and we're like so glad he's still a member. Like he's amazing. But
well, and Paige and I were there, and she was a lifeguard, and so she's certified. And I didn't know what to do necessarily on the CPR side of it, like what. And I'm like, okay, trying to remember the counting and stuff because there was a guy that was there that worked in an ER, so he was kind of running the show.
Yeah.
But Paige was like feeling his pulse on his wrist. And she like leaned over to me. She's like, I don't even feel his heart, like nothing.
Yeah.
He's cold. Like,
oh God.
And, they're trying to, so yeah. Anyway.
That went down a morbid road.
Yeah. But,
God.
Yeah, so, God dang it.
Move to the next question.
Why does someone have to die at the event?
I know. I mean, my guy lived, but.
Oh, okay.
Well,
geez, we'll just jump right into the happy-go-lucky here. Yeah. Last question. The number of CrossFit gyms in the U.S. Do you know how many CrossFit boxes there are in the U.S.?
Oh, gosh.
There's at least 2.
There are at least 2. I mean, I think in the metro, like in Des Moines area, there are like 16 or something. I'm going to go with like 6,000.
Pretty close.
Okay.
5,500.
Okay.
Really close, actually.
Yeah.
If it's Price is Right rules, you got it wrong because you went a little bit.
I
but
know,
that's fine.
my
That's
bad.
Fine. Any idea how many there are in the United States? Or not the United States, but the world.
Global?
So there's 5,500 in the U.S.
Yeah.
How many are in the rest of the world? Or the world including the U.S.?
I'm going to go with 20,000.
Close, 15,000.
Okay,
yeah.
I'm over. Now, I will say, I think the numbers have gone down a little bit in the past, like 3 years. Since COVID, for sure. There's been a reduction in affiliates.
Sure. Well, maybe someone's running a box, they just haven't paid their dues and the numbers are off. That could be the case. Okay. The semi-lightning, not so lightning round is done now. The snail round where we kind of have divergent thoughts. No, I think it's great.
Talk too much.
No worries. So we've talked a lot about the CrossFit side of the business.
Yeah.
I want to shift gears to the real estate side. So it's unique because you guys have multiple gyms, but both you and Luke have day jobs, so to speak.
We do.
So talk to me about how you got into real estate and how that plays into this whole mixture here.
I got into real estate because I binge watched Selling Sunset. So have you seen that?
Not every episode, but
okay.
It's basically I would call it like a desperate house, not desperate house, but like
Real Housewives.
Real Housewives, but they're realtors.
High-end real estate in like California, whatever. Guilty pleasure during COVID. So I at the time, we were working on purchasing our downtown property that our gym operates in. And the guy who I'm still friends with, who was my broker at the time, had helped me through a few leases and the purchase of this building. So it wasn't like my first rodeo with commercial real estate. I'd just always been on the tenant or buyer side. So anyway, I called him. We were talking about some stuff on the closing. I made the joke, hey, is your job as sexy as selling Sunset? Because if it is, I want in. It's like these women who wear like really tight pencil skirts and like stiletto Louboutins and, drive Porsches and shit like that. I was kidding. And he kind of laughed and we hung up. And he sent me a text or called me like several hours later. And he was like, hey, I've had a few cocktails and I have this idea, like you should think about coming to work with us. We need a woman and I think you'd be good. And I was like, well, I don't need a job. And I think my husband would get mad at me because I have shiny object syndrome. Like maybe this is just a shiny thing.
Like, Luke, I'm going to be a realtor now.
I know. And not to mention, I didn't have a license. I was like, I have no experience. Like, I don't think I'm what you want. And he was like, let's just meet about it and like talk through it. Well, when we met, he was like, I've been working with you. I know that you're smart and like you understand your lease structure and you understand purchases now. You've been on the other side of it. And I know you're well networked in the community and I think you should like go for it. And so I went home and I was like, so babe, I've been thinking, I met with Justin and here's the opportunity. And I thought he was going to be like, no, shut it down, focus. And he was like, I can tell you're bored. You should do it. And I was like, oh, shit.
You're supposed to say no.
Like, uh-oh. And he was like, I mean, the worst thing that can happen is you get into it, you realize you don't like it, and like we still have gyms, and you can figure it out. Well, it turned out that I started doing it, and I fucking love it. Like, I love it. So at that point, there was like no turning back.
You started in commercial, stayed in commercial?
Only commercial.
Okay.
I've never sold a house. I never want to sell a house. I don't know that I could sell a house. I have a whole team of people I work with who that's all they do. But I want nothing to do with residential. Back to that like feelingsy thing. Like I don't like the crying. I don't like the feelings about the personal, touch that goes into residential. In commercial, it's like very transactional in nature. So even though you could be helping like a small business find like their dream space or whatever, it's just not like residential.
Sure.
And I like that.
And people, I mean, my wife and I are just looking the last 3 days on like LoopNet and some of these other listing sites. There's hardly any.
You should not be doing that without me. Go ahead.
Right. We'll talk about that. But the nature of it, like you go to like an MLS or a Zillow and it's image heavy, video heavy. It's all about the feely, I want to see it, everything. The other listing sites for commercial is like no pictures, but here's the data on the street traffic. Here's the square footage. Here's the distance to the airport. Here's the, it's like,
yeah,
like you said, very different buyer and the interest is
very different. And that's why I think what people don't recognize is like having a commercial broker is super important because we're experts on how to interpret that information and not only how to interpret it, but like we understand the market itself. That's our job, to know the landlords, to know what tenants are active, to know where there's inventory and where there's not, to know like where businesses are consistently failing and is it a traffic problem? Is it a use problem? Like what is it? And so when looking at that data, I think it can be really overwhelming. I think a lot of clients have a hard time trusting that a broker is like working in their best interest, but that's what we're ethically bound to do. And so like when I do what I would call a market survey for a client, it's my job before I even send them the survey to identify properties that fit within like their parameters. So I automatically eliminate a bunch before I even send them something. I'll inevitably get people who will then be like, hey, I saw this other one on LoopNet, and they'll send me the address. And I'm like, yeah, I eliminated it because X, Y, and Z. So I think of us as like a time-saving tool. Mm-hmm. I also like oftentimes when it's a lease structure, like I don't get paid by the tenant typically. The landlord pays us. So for someone to engage with me, have a conversation, get some education, get a market survey, and have me help negotiate on their behalf doesn't cost them anything.
Sure. That's
So,
great.
yeah.
We'll talk later for sure.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because, and then like you said, most of these people that are doing this are business owners. They're experts in their area, but they don't know how to, some people might not even know you can negotiate on a lease. If they tell you, hey, the lease rate is $30 a square foot, and you're like, okay. But then you don't know, it's a brand new build. Market rate in this area is $28 for a brand new build. Like you're overpaying already, but you don't know that. But you could also say, how about 23? And they're like,
right.
Sure. And you're like, well, goddamn, I just saved myself like thousands of dollars a month and not even know you can do that, you know?
Well, and there's stuff that I don't think the general population knows can be part of that negotiation. So like free rent packages, tenant improvement allowances. In the market, what is a good tenant improvement allowance? And can we push for that? Is it a landlord that's well capitalized? Can we get more aggressive on the rate versus the tenant improvement? There are other things too that play into it, like, timing. So if they really want you in a space, but you have 6 months left on your lease, is there a way for us to negotiate 4 months of free rent so that they can actually make the move earlier? And it doesn't necessarily negatively impact the landlord because they're going to tack those 4 months onto the end. So there's just a lot of creativity. There's a lot of understanding how the different landlords in the market operate, because a lot of them have varying preferences on where they'll give and where they won't. And so having that market intel is just really valuable. And so I always do that when I hear of small business owners who self-negotiated their leases, because I'm like, there's a free resource who will work on your behalf to get you the best deal, and you just wanted to do it by yourself? For what reason? But I've been there. I did it. I didn't know any different. So yeah, it's one of those things I want people to know that having someone, it would be like going through a divorce and being like, I don't need a lawyer. Take whatever you want. You just wouldn't do that.
Sure.
And you pay the lawyer.
Sure. So, the lawyer's getting paid regardless.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it is an interesting situation too, because now you've been on the buyer side, but now you've been on the other side.
Yeah.
And as we kind of alluded to earlier, you guys opened up another gym location, which I'm sure having some real estate connections helped find the perfect place for that. So I think that's a huge piece of it too.
Yeah.
Because I think for that extra business, I know we talked about it briefly, but you guys just opened within a year ago, right? So what is 8035 Platinum is the name of that one?
8035 Platinum Fitness. Waukee is obviously a super rapidly growing market. What happened was I've never walked into a space in commercial real estate and been like, I need to make this a gym, ever. And I toured a client through this space, and I walked in and I was like, I need to make this a gym. And so there was a guy who'd previously worked for us. We knew he was interested in either buying our gyms or opening his own location underneath the umbrella of 8035. And so I approached him and I was like, hey, would you be interested in taking this location on as your baby, buying into a small ownership percentage, and keeping it under the umbrella, because then you have more resources. You have other staff that can help you. We have our systems in place, all that good stuff. And he was like, yeah, I for sure want to do that. And then I said, I'm thinking maybe we don't make this a CrossFit. And he was fully on board. That was his thought too. And so it just so happened that we both saw that exact space and thought the same thing. We both thought the same thing about the programming. And so I think we opened in, I want to say June or July. I can't remember.
This summer sometime.
Right, yeah, this summer. It's a unique pivot for us because we've always been known as a brand, as a CrossFit. And so I think getting into a market where they know 8035, they know who we are, but we've never had a location there. And by the way, we're doing this new concept. That's been the biggest challenge, which we knew it would be. But we're working through it.
Sure. Was there, when you guys, you've launched 2 or 3 other locations in your past, was there a certain number of members you wanted to have by a certain point? And did you exceed that number? Was it less or more? What was kind of the reality of getting off the ground for this new spot?
Yeah. So We had like a pretty specific business plan in place pre-COVID and then fucked everything up.
Put it in there and just frappe mode.
Yeah. And part of it was due to the fact that like we have a downtown location and it was commuter based. And all of a sudden people were hybrid. No one's coming downtown. And so we had to change kind of the business model, the business plan, the projections, like whatever you want to call it. We had to just like adapt a little bit. And so in our new location, I understand the Waukee community pretty well and have done a lot of like research and the growth and things like that. There are a lot of options for fitness there, but it's not saturated by any means. And so the area that we opened up at is like on the far west, like edge of town where the new Northwest High School is. And so that particular location is really booming in terms of like residential and commercial growth. And so we wanted to be there first. So we knew it would be like a bit of a slower uptick because there are some really established, really great gyms in Waukee, and we knew we're not going to steal a bunch of their members. But there's so many new people moving out there that I want all of them. And so, my goal within the year is 100 members, not within this calendar year, within a year of opening is 100 members. And I think that's incredibly doable. My like cap is probably closer to 200. So
I was going to ask, that was my next question was max amount of capacity, because you see a lot of boxes that probably, they're not going to turn the hose off. You got people coming to the door like, we'll just be packed and no one will have space to operate or whatever. So is that number is like 200 is your max? 200
is probably the max, and that's with some really, really good structures in place. So we don't like having more than probably 20 people in a room at once. Although it's fun and like for an event, it's super cool. I think from a quality and coaching standpoint, we like as 8035, I'll only speak for ourselves, but we pride ourselves on our coaching ability. And when you get more than 20 in a room lifting, it gets more difficult to do a good job coaching. And so 20 in a class is really healthy. We like that number. We're comfortable at that number. More than that, I'd just start adding class times or like structuring things a little bit differently. Have you guys ever toyed with having like two coaches? Yeah. So say if you have that place is huge. It's beautiful in there. Mm-hmm. You could do like a 40 member class and just hire another coach, because then you can justify the cost of it that way. Yeah. So downtown, like in the peak of things, which would have been just pre-COVID, we typically in our evenings, we would have two coaches on site. And that was pretty effective. We'd have one coach lead and then one assist. And so everyone did everything together. But once we broke out to lift or to do something, the WOD itself, then the coaches would kind of like tag team everything. Sure. That's interesting. Yeah. So another piece of this that I think is interesting to look at is leasing versus buying. Yeah. Because a lot of people would say, oh, like you guys should like buy land and build a new gym and that type of thing versus like lease something for a 3-year term or 5-year term. What's kind of your opinion on leasing versus buying when it comes to commercial real estate? Yeah. So I have a little bit of both right now. Our Grimes location is a lease. I'd like eventually to own in Grimes. Waukee is a new market for us. And so for me, leasing made the most sense. We do have a longer term lease. And funny enough, my landlord in Grimes is my landlord in Waukee. We have a really good relationship. He's a broker as well. So we like operate in the same world consistently. We purchased our downtown property because taxes, operating expenses continued to increase. And it got to a point where I was like, we're going to break even or like be in the red eventually with this lease structure. And I knew they wanted to offload the building. And so we found ourselves in a position where we could get a good price on the property. At the time, it was, like I said, just pre-COVID. Interest rates were crazy low. And it made a lot of sense for our business to be an owner-user. I didn't want to be a landlord. I wanted to occupy the space myself. Because that felt easier, frankly. And I think sometimes people are like, oh, why don't you just like buy your Grimes location? Well, it turns out that like you have to have a down payment and like it's a lot, right? Like when we're talking about millions of dollars And a lot of times you can establish partnerships. So a really common way to purchase commercial property is for someone to create an entity like an LLC, and it'll be a partnership of, anywhere from like 2 to 20 people. And the way that they might structure it, for example, is like, okay, we found this property. The down payment's going to be X. In order to buy into this and retain like a percentage ownership, we're asking for a minimum of this to contribute to the down payment. Luke and I did the downtown building by ourselves. And so when I say like we blew our wad on that, I'm totally serious. And so after that, it was like, let's make sure I know what the fuck I'm doing. Like, you got property taxes, you have maintenance, you have unexpected, like the other day, someone picked up the back of the toilet, the tank lid, and dropped it. That's like a maintenance cost. It sounds stupid, but HVAC, like there's just a lot. And so I wanted to make sure I knew what the hell I was doing before we ever even looked at buying into other properties. And up to that point, I didn't know how to operate like the partnership. So when we bought the downtown building, I didn't know that was like I knew it was a thing, right? But I wasn't in commercial real estate, so I didn't know how to structure it. And I'm fine having not done that with that particular property. But looking ahead, I'd probably structure it as a partnership. Sure.
Well, that's interesting. Wealth allocation slice, because a lot of these higher net worth individuals, they do a 5% slice and, hey, we're going to do commercial.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to know jack about that industry. They can just say, here's $50,000, go put me in a 5% share of a, $500,000 building or $1 million building or whatever.
Right.
And then if they're getting residuals on that, it's better than sticking it in the savings account or something.
Right.
So,
and on the flip side, if something happens to operate at a loss, your risk is a lot lower if you're in a partnership situation. So, I'm in a position where because I'm a broker and because I have some market know-how, I could help like lead that partnership to a purchase and how to manage it, how to allocate, like get the accounting set up and everything. But I just haven't done it yet.
Sure. Well, and even, and I was mentioning to you earlier, there's a unit 2 doors down from here that's been for sale. My wife and I were looking into it to turn it into like a rentable photo studio, small event boutique space. And, they're selling it for like $200,000, which is low for a commercial place, but given the market and all the different stuff, but they want 25% down. It's like, and Paige and I were both like, how many people have 25% down for any commercial property? Because if it's $1 million building, you have to have $25,000 or $250,000 cash to buy it.
Yeah.
So this makes a lot more sense that there's like funding options besides going to the bank and say, or going to your Discover. I'll put it on my Discover card for 25% interest.
Right. Well, and the other thing too is like the SBA has really awesome programs for purchasing commercial property, especially for owner users and especially for like female owned businesses. There's all sorts of like cool stuff. I have some resources that I almost always bank on when I have a client who comes to me and says like, I'm thinking I might want to buy. If they don't have a contact in mind, there are some people in town that I trust immensely to say like, here's a banker and here's someone who facilitates SBA loans. And together they will put the options in front of you that make the most sense and you can pick. And the SBA opportunity offers just a lower down payment. And oftentimes the structure gets you a better interest rate too. And so like with our downtown property, we did an SBA loan. So it wasn't 25%, it was 10.
Sure. Which saves you tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, depending on how big the building is.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
That's great. No, and I think that's interesting to know because especially people are listening and they're a business owner. There's definitely pros and cons to it. I know I talked to our financial coach and he had said when I got this space, because I was looking at buying when I first started out, and he's like, pump the freaking brakes, dude. Like you've never even leased a place before. Like it's like buying a house and have never even lived in an apartment or a college dorm room or anything, like moving out of your parents' house. Like, I'm going to go buy a house in the suburbs. Like, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
So that helped a lot to have advisors in there. What advice would you have for someone who has a small business and they're leasing and they might be considering upgrading and they're looking at, should I just buy the damn place or should I just continue to lease?
My first piece of advice, leasing, buying, whatever, is to get yourself a broker, someone that you trust. Because I think they add value to the conversation that like you otherwise might not have. I've even had people like send me properties and be like, hey, I'm thinking about buying this. And I'm like, do not buy that. Like, do not buy that. Because we know something. We know something about the area, the market, what's happening. And so number one would be get yourself representation. The person, if you drive by a building and there's a sign outside and you're like, that's interesting, and you call that phone number, the person who picks up is the broker who ethically, legally represents the landlord. They have to work on the landlord's behalf. That's their job. And so I think a lot of times people fall into this trap of like, oh, I called the name on the sign and the person who answered the phone said that they can help me. They can get an offer in front of the landlord. Well, yeah, they can. But again, they're working for the landlord. And so get yourself representation. Ask someone else to like make those calls and help you determine what the best solution is. The other thing is like, as brokers, we often have those contacts. So I'll be like, hey, I know I meet with banks all the time, bankers, and some of them, invest in certain areas, others, in different areas. And so a lot of times we'll have small business owners who will say like, oh, my bank like won't give me the loan. Right. But there is a bank that probably will. And so oftentimes we have a little bit of an understanding of like where financing can be best sought at particular points in the market.
Sure. No, I think it's a great piece there, because there's a lot of these things in the weeds that could scare someone off of like, oh, I have a business in ABC industry, but I'm not versed in real estate. I'll just keep it as an online store because I don't want to even touch real estate, but or whatever it is. I think it's an important thing to look at. But then also like knowing a good place in town that's growing, or the other tenants in a building that if it's a gym, it's going to make a lot of noise and could mess some stuff up, or it's next to that Indian place. It's going to smell like curry. Maybe you shouldn't have your business right next to that. Some of those things that you might not even think about.
Well, and the other thing to consider is I mentioned like volatility and like everything could crumble tomorrow. And so when people are looking at purchasing property, I want them to always assume that their business will not survive. And that sounds awful, but when you're investing in property, you want to make sure that that property is leasable to someone else, not just you. So if my gym goes under tomorrow, can I take the space that it was in because I own the building? I'm on the hook for the building. That's not going anywhere. The bank's not going to be like, oh, too bad about your gym. Is it leasable space? And so that's another part of that conversation that can happen. And that's why sometimes I will steer clients away from properties, because if you're not the occupant, I don't know who will be. Like, I don't like the space for any use other than yours. It's going to be really difficult to fill. So just getting creative and like how to think through every scenario, every problem. What could the outcomes be? What can we do if, God forbid, something happened?
No, I love it. I think it's all good things to consider that way. You mentioned you were working for another agent. You've recently come into this new role as the director of commercial for Sarah Hopkins. So talk about this new role that you're doing with a team of other residential people, but you're the lone wolf here, standing alone here.
I am the lone wolf. So I started commercial real estate with an organization called JLL. They're like a global commercial real estate organization. And honestly, there was no better way I could have started, because you really kind of get thrown to the fire in a good sense. You get exposure to all kinds of deals. My group of peers that I worked with day to day, there were like between 10 and 15, are the smartest humans on earth when it comes to commercial real estate. And I was learning from them every day. I have the utmost respect for like them and their successes. I just found myself in a position where it is a hierarchy in commercial real estate, right? So when you start, you might be top dog, or you might be the only person, right? Like I am now. And eventually you build this team. And I know that in commercial real estate, a lot of people who do this job like never retire fully. And so I felt like there was a little bit of a cap on my ability to like get where I wanted to be, which this is going to sound kind of bad, but like in charge. And not from like a power standpoint. I just wanted to be able to create an environment. It's a very male-dominated industry. And I wanted to create an environment where young women could could come in and get a different experience than they would with a really big commercial real estate company. It's just a different like way of working. And so Sarah Hopkins is a friend of mine. I had a conversation with her about it. She was on a panel for an event that I was running. And if I'm being honest, I was venting a little bit, like as a friend. I was kind of like, I just like, I don't know if I'm going to get where I want to be. And she was like, well, would you consider like coming onto my brokerage and you can like build your own team, you know, start with your own portfolio, build it. And as you have needs, like you bring in whoever you want. And I was like, holy shit, that sounds pretty cool. And so it really felt like a little bit, if I'm getting woo-woo, like universal. It felt like, you know, I had really gained a lot from my JLL experience. I was maybe looking for a change. I wasn't sure what it was. And then she kind of came into play. And suddenly I was like, that is what I want to do. Like that sounds like the setup that I'm looking for. Doesn't come without challenges, but I'm really glad that's the move I made.
So I think it's interesting hearing kind of how you've come into this, because then you have your own lane. You can build your own little team there and everything. How long ago did you join the team and what's been the result since then?
Yeah, so I left JLL like the very end of April, beginning of May. I wanted to be conscious of like getting through, making sure like the deals that I'd been working on were kind of like cared for over there. So I didn't really kick things off with Sarah and that team until probably the beginning of July. And that's when I was really able to start like getting things going. And initially, because Remax Precision, which is what Sarah Hopkins' real estate team is kind of umbrellaed under, because they don't have as much of that like commercial world stuff, there were little things like making sure our documents were in order, making sure that like I had a template for the things that I needed, because a lot of the commercial stuff was like repurposed residential, and that just like in our industry, it just operates a lot differently. And so making sure I had all the tools I needed was really important. I wanted to give myself time to figure out what I did have and what I didn't have. They're great about creating the things that I need. But initially kicking things off, I really wanted to focus on tenant representation. So people looking for space, wanting to buy, wanting to lease, in part because I was always a tenant and that's like where my soft spot is. I like representing the tenant group, but also because I wanted to make sure we had our affairs in order for listings. Once you get into the agency side and taking on listings, you have to be prepared for like signage needs and updating databases and making sure all that information is there, reporting to let landlords know what's happening on their property. Have you toured it? Have people called on it? Like, what are our leads? And so I wanted to make sure that I wasn't taking on listings right away that I couldn't do a good job with.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. You mentioned you were at a part of this networking group, the female empowerment stuff.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit. We kind of been following a breadcrumb of this throughout the entire story of your life and wanting to kind of really focus on this. At what point did you want to kind of have an event or a physical gathering of women that can empower them?
Yeah. So I think starting the gyms really changed like my perspective on women supporting women. I think it became apparent to me that I had been like working against myself, and I'd have these complaints about like how women were treated or why, pay wasn't fair. Well, I wasn't doing anything to like help the cause, right? So eventually, and this was actually when I started with JLL, I have a great network of amazing women that I surround myself with. And JLL had my managing directors at the time had approached me and said like, hey, you have this great network. Like, we've done an event in the past before you were here that was female focused. Like, maybe you should throw something together. And I was like, I love that, but I also don't throw things together. I do them, and I do them well.
Sure.
It's kind of it's the goal. It's the jam. And so because JLL is such a big organization, it wasn't possible for me to like, especially with sort of the COVID stuff and the economic downturn, they weren't going to like write us checks to get this thing off the ground. So we had to get creative. And so I thought, well, fuck it. I'll start an LLC and I'll open a bank account. I'll ask for sponsorships, JLL being the presenting sponsor. And we'll kick this off right. Like, we'll make it big. So the first year I did it, it's called Taking Up Space. The first year I did it, I had the support of the other women in our JLL office, and that group was the presenting sponsor of the event. And the idea is that we get like a very diverse panel of about 6 women in leadership in Iowa, and that we talk about everything. So not just like, let's talk about business and like the barriers women face. Like, let's talk about what it's like to have to hide a tampon when you're in a meeting and you realize you're like bleeding out. Like, it sounds silly, but there are all of these really gender-specific challenges that I think women have that feel like almost shameful. You know, like if you're having a hard time postpartum, you feel shame about it. If you're on your period and you don't feel good, you feel shame about it. And I think that no one ever talks about it because it's like uncomfortable. You say the word tampon and most men like walk out of the room. But I thought that it was important to have an event and a platform where women could like ask the questions that they're uncomfortable asking, and leaders could give the advice that maybe they wouldn't give to a room full of men. And so the idea was like a rapid fire panel with like really transparent, really engaging questions with badass bitches who like do all the things. And we accomplished that year 1 very much. We sold out. It was awesome. Year 2, we sold out again, but we made it bigger. And our panel crushed, and we had kind of fixed some of the things that we felt we could have done better. And so looking into next year, I plan to make it even better.
That's awesome. Is it just the one event a year, or do you guys do like a membership thing where people pay a fee and then they get other support or resources?
That's a great question. So currently it's an annual event. The goal in discussion with other women is to create some other element that is more consistent throughout the year. So right now I'm trying to figure out what that looks like. I've had a real big request for an executive group. So these women who either own businesses of a particular, revenue number or team size or whatever, who are like, I love going to networking, but sometimes like talking to young professionals is more beneficial for them. And I would like to be in a room where it's like high-level executive women where we can really have conversations about running our business and not just network. And so that's one aspect. And then the other aspect is more of like the professional networking, which is valuable to a lot of people, but making sure that it's valuable. Like you're not just showing up and seeing the same people every single time. And so right now it's been a little bit of like brainstorming through what that will look like. And my hope would be that when we have the next event, probably end of April 2025, that I can launch the additional portion of that, whatever it's going to end up looking like.
Sure. Well, now my business brain's cranking away. I'm like,
I know.
I have like 2 different things. First thing would be high-level mastermind for the people that are your judges, panelists that are already established that need that.
Yeah.
Because you could do a weekly call or a monthly in-person meeting with a lunch, charge them a couple $1,000s a month, and there's a lot of value there. It's a high-level networking. The other way could be go digital, and you could really grow it past the point of Iowa where there's a monthly membership, like a not a mastermind, but it's like a Patreon, so to speak, where they pay a monthly fee and then they get certain things like access to exclusive interviews like this, where it's an interview with another, like a successful woman or something. You have like somebody that's doing like crushing it, and it's like the only place this interview is in the membership.
Yeah.
And then maybe they get other things. The other third one that I thought of was like if you guys did some kind of consulting or coaching for startup businesses.
Yeah.
And then you do like an equity buy where like we'll get your entity will get 5% of their company, but you get coaching from like the CEO of a huge company.
Yeah.
And that could catapult them further. And then you guys do an equity piece, because there's like so many ways you could do that.
So many ways. And the thing is, I do think women are like starving for female-focused opportunities. And I think sometimes like I've had women come to me and say, oh, it'd be great if you would put like a male ally on your panel. And I'm like, no, not because I'm a man hater, but because like, in my opinion, men have a seat at almost every table. And if I'm creating a table that is for women, I want women at the table. Like, I want to give women the opportunity to sit and like speak. And frankly, like, I get, no offense, I get men's opinions all fucking day. You know, like, I get men in leadership who do not hesitate to share their, you know, wisdom. And I think it's from like a societal perspective, I think it's expected and I think they're accustomed to it. I think women in leadership have a harder time feeling like they can just offer advice, wisdom, insight, like whatever. And so again, I'm very focused on creating, I think that a space that is very female focused is unique. And I think even a lot of the things out there that you can join right now that are like more geared towards females, they get really careful with like, oh, well, we don't want to discriminate. You know, males are welcome too. Well, the second a male walks in that room, it's different. It just is. Like the conversation is different. The tone is different. The things that will be said, the way things are kind of the way people hear things are different. So again, like, you know, it sounds a little bit like man-haterish. It's not. It's not at all. I just want to create a space where women feel really safe and empowered and like compelled to share and to help one another and to like build each other up and not feel even a little bit impeded upon by a male being in the room.
I love the mission. I love it. When it comes to all the things you're doing, what fills your cup the most? From the gyms, from real estate, for the female empowerment, all the different things, what fills your cup the most?
That is not a fair question.
We ask the hard questions on this podcast.
So here's the thing. I have learned that what fills me up is empowering people. And everything that I'm involved in does just that. And so it's hard for me to pick one because like I have seen insane, inspiring things come out of the gym. You know, people getting married and having babies, women discovering that they're like 10 times stronger than they thought they could ever be. There's so much empowerment that happens there. I think that's where my love for empowerment as an idea like really grew. As a small business owner, I went through a lot of things that were challenging. I failed a lot. I fucked a lot of stuff up. And so in the real estate sector, like I love helping people avoid all that stuff that I couldn't avoid. And so that's an empowerment method too. And then when it comes to the women's side of it, it's almost like I feel like I did a poor job in my earlier years of contributing to like the success of women. And so I will continue for the rest of my life trying to make up for that. And I have a daughter now. So that also is like massively impactful in terms of the way that I feel about women and being empowered. So I cannot give you a good answer, but empowerment is my like passion. How about that?
No, I love it. Okay. It's an honest answer, I think, because you can be like, this, move on. Like it's a multi-layered, I think. So as you're kind of looking to the future with the female empowerment stuff, if you're talking to a younger girl that's, you know, let's say college age, she has an idea for business or she's trying to figure out what she's going to do post-grad, what advice did you have for someone like that to encourage and empower them to be a badass and crush what they're trying to do?
So my first piece of advice would be that other people's opinions of you are none of your business. And I think for a lot of years, even professionally, I got really hung up on what people thought about me, what people thought about my ideas, how I was perceived in a room. And the moment that I sort of like let go of that and became a little bit more like authentic to who I am, like I just embraced it, everything got easier. And I found that like people liked me more because I think they could sense that I was like, this is exactly who I am. You're going to get the same all the time. I'm not trying to be or do anything. This is just it. So that would be advice number one. Advice number two is done is better than perfect. My best friend gave me that quote. I think getting hung up on the details or like analysis paralysis is the killer of the best ideas in the world. And so sometimes just like executing and like going for it is the best way to like and figure it out as you go. Like, again, adapting is huge. And then the last piece would be like failure is inevitable. Like you're not, especially if you're a small business owner, you're not doing it well if you're not failing continuously.
I love it. And I think to your first point about the authenticity and being yourself is so key, because when you walk in a room, people can feel if you're being fake.
Oh, yeah.
And people think, oh, I'm putting on this front because it's what it's expected. Yeah. It's like, if you're yourself, people will open up more. They will be more forthright. You'll like go further in life because you're not pretending to be anybody but yourself. And I think that's a huge piece too.
Well, and I think, I was a 40-year-old woman who got into commercial real estate with no prior experience. And I think that also lended to my ability to just embrace my authenticity, because I had to be okay with like walking into a room and admitting that I didn't know everything. Like I don't know, but I can get you the answer. And so I think letting people know that like, I am curious, I am here for you. I am a fast learner. I'm intelligent. I'm direct. I'm honest. I think showing that to people provided a lot more substance to my relationships than just being like, well, I know everything about commercial real estate. I think that they felt like I was going to do my best to facilitate everything for them. And if I didn't know something, I would sure as shit find out. I'm not going to just like float around in the world not knowing. So, yeah, authenticity is real big for me.
Sure. No, I love it. Tying it all together, we're kind of coming to the end here. Yep. Such an amazing life story. I'm so thankful that you've come on the show and shared everything with us. What's kind of the vision for you? You mentioned you're in your 40s and just making this career change. What's the next 40 years look like for Abby?
I honestly think that I'll do commercial real estate until I die. I love that world. I love the constant change and variation. Again, thriving in chaos, and it's constantly a little bit chaotic, which I really enjoy. I think eventually Luke and I have always had the plan at some point to sell the gyms, to sell the event, and let kind of new blood take over. So that will definitely be something that I think in the next, 5 years will be something that transpires. And then I think in terms of like the women's stuff, I'm never going to stop that. So whether I'm a member of a couple boards, Young Women's Resource Center and Crew, and I think I'll continue to try and create an impact in the community for women, whether that's through my event, on board roles, fundraising opportunities. Someone asked me the other day, they were like, oh, would you ever be interested in politics? And I was like, I did way too many questionable things in college to ever go into politics. No, hard no. But I do, the community side of it is important. Like I love Des Moines. I love Iowa. I would not have said that in my early 20s. And so doing everything I can to support young women being like fucking badass in this state, in this city is a huge focus for me.
No, I love it. It's super great. Where can people learn more about you? Any of the multiple things you have going on, where should people go to find out more about those things?
Yeah, it's hard to avoid me. Like Instagram, I guess. Like I post about work, I post about events, I post a little bit about myself, about everything. That's just Abi Reiland. I'm not hard to find. LinkedIn is a good way to get a hold of me. My email address is on there. My phone number is everywhere. So yeah, I would say for the gyms, www.8035fitness.com, and that has links to all our locations and our corporate wellness. thecfcircus.com is our event site. But yeah, I try to be in a lot of places. So if you look me up, you'll be able to find me.
Sure. Well, Abby, thank you so much for coming on the pod today. We'll make sure to link up all that stuff below and sharing about your journey. I think it's been a really fun conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. Well, there you guys have it. We're done with another episode of the Rhymes with Odd podcast. If you made it this far in the show, you know what to do. If you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, make sure to subscribe. Give us a 5-star rating if you're listening on iTunes, and check us out on social media for clips from all the episodes. Until the next episode, my name is Ryan Snod. It rhymes with odd, and I'm out. Peace. Thank you so much for watching yet another episode of the Rhymes with Odd podcast. We really do appreciate your support. If you could give us a 5-star review on Apple iTunes, that makes a world of difference, guys. Also, if you're tuning in on YouTube or Spotify, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss another episode, and check us out on social media. Also, if you'd like to inquire more about our services here at Snod Media Group or learn about doing your own podcast for your own business, you can find us at snodmedia.com. We'll see you in the next episode. Peace.